Yeah, I'm super excited that we were able to put this together. Thanks for taking out the time.
Oh, thanks for having me. Super nice to be here.
Yeah. So when I try to find out from the interwebs who is John Lilic, I think that he's an angel investor, a philanthropist, and a Web3 executive. But now I can ask you, and you can tell me who John is, and how you sort of got to where you are today.
Well, I'm also very, very lucky dummy degen, as I like to say. But no, I would also add product builder. I mean, I worked 6 years at Consensus, intensely focused on trying to build Ethereum. And fortunately, over the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to start focusing more on the VC side of things. And more recently, I kind of went back to my builder roots and working with some of the fine folks at Telos as well. So it's a bit of a mix, but I really enjoy working. I really enjoy building, particularly in the Ethereum and more broadly blockchain ecosystem. And yeah, mostly I've just been very lucky to work with wonderful people and kind of like ride the wave at the right time, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I can you hear the humbleness, and in one of your interviews, I heard something that resonated with me a bit. I think you said something along the lines of, I've been lucky to stumble onto Bitcoin, which I kind of liked, because you probably didn't just stumble, but there's a lot of folks who, sort of construct a story later on how they were super visionary, but I guess you had to have a lot of interest, but also just a little bit of, I guess, say it's luck, but some sort of synchronicity. But you can throughout your career, one can see a passion for Ethereum, or at least when I read what are the things that you've been working on. So how did that come about?
Yeah, well, I was doing like e-commerce 2010, 11, 12. And I used to think that having a bank account was like a human right or something along those lines. One of my online businesses suddenly lost. I mean, we had a merchant services account and we were able to process credit card payments. I basically got canceled like in late 2012.
Like politically?
No. I was building websites. I was doing SEO, and then I would plug into the back end of manufacturers who would sell products like garden seeds, for example. And so people could purchase these products on my website. The order would go to the back end manufacturer, who would then drop ship, and I would take a small margin. And then one day, the bank they accused me of selling dildos. And I said,
"Were you?"
No, I wasn't. Maybe I should have been.
I mean, nothing wrong with dildos.
No, that's what I said. There's nothing wrong with that. But it was one of the big banks who famously, laundered $62 billion of Mexican cartel money. And I said, wait a minute. What do you mean this is hurting your reputation?
Yeah. I'm guessing when you work for the cartels, you have to really keep up the appearances of, being approved.
It was unbelievable. They fixed the LIBOR rate. I mean, it was unbelievable, some of the things that were going on. And I was just a very small merchant. My money was frozen for 9 months. I had to get my dad to like Western Union me money so I could buy groceries. Anyway, in the end, they acknowledged that I had done nothing wrong. They still sort of contended that I was hurting the reputation, even though I wasn't actually selling any sex toys. And even if I was, so what?
Yeah.
But in the midst of that, I started panicking, trying to find alternatives. And that's, I realized like PayPal and some of these other things weren't really a great solution. And I stumbled into Bitcoin, very quickly became obsessed and just dropped everything. And that was kind of the beginning of the journey. I started going to Bitcoin conferences. So, for example, 2014, Bitcoin in Amsterdam. A gentleman named Patrick Byrne, who was the CEO of Overstock, was the main speaker there. I met lots of wonderful people and realized that this thing had tremendous momentum. Shortly after that, I went to New York City and I started volunteering at a place called the Bitcoin Center.
Oh, man, I saw that place in that one documentary.
That's right, Banking on Bitcoin. That's right.
Yeah. There's Vitalik, who's at the time still like just an author, at the Bitcoin magazine. He's like 12 years old.
That's right. Yeah. It was a big CNN piece that really brought that place to the mainstream by a guy named Morgan Spurlock, who recently passed away, actually. He was the guy that ate McDonald's every day for like a month. And he did a big piece, and suddenly the Bitcoin Center and Bitcoin entered into the mainstream. I was very fortunate. I got to meet lots of interesting people, Brian Armstrong, Jesse Powell from Kraken,
nice.
and others. I met a guy named Joe Lubin, who later I worked for 6 years. That's where I discovered Ethereum, just going to BitDev meetups in New York City. And then I was very fortunate. I started working at Consensus shortly after. I think I was one of the first employees.
No, those must have been the times.
Well, it was a very interesting time. Lots of youthful optimism. Obviously, Ethereum was very exciting at the time. Consensus was sort of, let's say, one of the core. I mean, basically, Joe was financing Ethereum development. I mean, I give him a lot of credit. He put his money where his mouth is. Financing Consensus. Consensus started building lots of core infrastructure, developer tools. We built things like MetaMask, later things like Infura, etc. And then I helped basically kickstart our global enterprise business. So we signed a partnership agreement, a global partnership agreement with Microsoft in the fall of 2015. Later, we built something called the Enterprise. We helped build something called the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And so I spent a number of years basically all over the world trying to promote Ethereum with many of these large institutions. I guess we were successful to some extent. Lots and lots of really interesting meetings back in those days, thinking about how smart contracts can potentially reorganize many of these big institutions. And then of course, really later became even more focused on the product development side of it. I spent some time focused on something called Uport and self-sovereign identity, thinking about ways in which Ethereum can help enable the sovereign individual to have not only custody of their assets, but custody over their identity. Later, at the end of 2020, I left. I mean, my time, like all good things, they come to an end. In the meantime, though, right around 2016, 17, I started coming to Belgrade because there was a researcher, a guy, an obscure guy on Twitter named Mihailo Bijelic, who was saying some really remarkable things about how to scale Ethereum, thinking about basically multiple scaling solutions in one network, or one, basically what became L2. The original Polygon concept was called Neth, the proto Polygon. So I would come here all the time, work with Mihailo. Very, very, very hardworking guy, very diligent.
Oh man, excuse me for interrupting you. Did I tell you that Mihailo went through my startup accelerator here in this space?
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that was a startup before Polygon,
right?
And I'm happy that we were not that bad that we sort of diverted him from entrepreneurship. So yeah, that was pretty awesome to see him go on to great success, afterwards.
Well, but the thing is, many years of grinding, like 2016, 17, 18, 19. I mean, he was just very persistent. And then he sort of decided that it would be difficult for him to take the project forward on his own. So he found these Matic guys, and together they formed a partnership. I was very fortunate to be maybe one of their early investors, one of their early advisors. We had a pretty crazy couple of years, and then I moved on and started focusing on basically my investing, my angel activities.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting things for us and for our audience, because we sort of cater to startup founders, and being an investor. I mean, I remember back in the day. So I was in a startup that was funded by Seedcamp, which is like a European Y Combinator, and our investor was telling us, okay, so we have our investors as well. We have a valuation. Until then, it didn't really click with me that being an investor is also sort of like being a founder, and not in insignificant ways. So can you sort of walk us through your investment thesis, if there are any, for an angel sort of stage, and how do you approach working with founders? I mean, that was a really cool story of how long actually you were working with Mihailo.
Yeah.
Usually angels just cut a check and
No.
get out of the building.
No, I mean some
Yeah.
people do, but the thing
Yeah.
is, it's gotten very competitive. You have to do more. You have to. So I would say, first of all, you have to be very stupid and very lucky. Okay, and the reason I say that is because it's very hard, very very hard at super early stages to have strong assumptions about how innovation will go. For example, my good buddy Martin Koppelman, he developed Gnosis. Gnosis was originally a prediction market, and for many years they tried to build Gnosis as a prediction market. Later pivoted. And then, of course, helped develop Safe and now the Gnosis chain. And so the innovation path was sort of hard to predict, even though the early assumptions were quite strong that it would be this like prediction market and it would kind of like revolutionize things. So I think you have to be very flexible. That's one thing. You have to work very, very hard. I think in my case, probably the only reason I get into deals and have opportunities is also because I work very closely as an advisor, which is really to say, on the product development side. And so you really have to kind of like delve into this stuff. You have to understand the technology quite well. You have to be able to understand the latest sort of state of the art because things in Ethereum change so rapidly. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then you have to be very patient. I think trying to pigeonhole and constrain founders, and we see this stuff in particular today with, for example, these big ZK projects, which is something we'll talk about in a little while, but you get tremendous amounts of capital, very, very strong opinions, particularly from big VCs about how something should go. And then later, the innovation path invalidates those assumptions. And now you're sort of stuck, whether you're locked into a prover that's like obsolete, or maybe some of the design decisions were made in support of a go-to-market quick strategy or quickly strategy versus giving founders the space and the freedom to make mistakes, fail fast, fail cheap. I think that's a very important component in all of that. And so that's why I say you kind of have to be a little dumb because
or foolish.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very, very hard to have super strong assumptions, and it's generally not the case, certainly not been the case in Ethereum. Looking back on it in the early days, I mean, we used to say Ethereum was a world computer. But it's not a world computer. Like AWS and Microsoft Azure, they built a world computer. Right? We built a kind of like global financial, basically US dollar thin and fiat client. And now there's more innovation coming and different use cases being realized. But at the time, and then, we had very strong assumptions about sharding, for example, 1,024 shards, 64 shards. And then in 2018, Vitalik posted a quiet, on his blog post, one shard maybe. And, like these things are very, very, very hard. It's very hard to scale this stuff. I admire the people that are working on these hard problems, but you have to give them the space and the time to go through the process. And maybe that process isn't sort of linear or isn't going to follow, a predictable path. And so I think that's one of the things that I firmly believe in as you said, sort of investment thesis, which is to say you invest in people. People have very good work ethic. Obviously, people who are talented and understand how to deal with complex problems. And then you provide support, and the support you provide is, relative to your strengths. I feel like I can definitely, and I love to work. It's very important to work on the product development side, more so lately also on the go-to-market strategy side, because it's not easy to go to market. And, holistically together, like I say this all the time, there's a lot of my colleagues I call them like wellness VCs, okay? These guys have like a great tan, they look great, they're sleeping 9 hours a day, they're having like a nice casual lunch, everything is nice and easy, and once in a while they check in on a call. And just because you write a check, it's competitive now. You can't just rely on that. Founders are much more selective now because they realize they need more. They need support. They need freedom and flexibility, and they need to be able to talk to you and say, look, this is a hard problem. I'm not sure what to do. And for you to be able to say, that's okay, and let's think through it.
Yeah.
It's not just like I give you a check and I expect you to go to market in 6 months and it better go this way. That doesn't work anymore.
You mentioned that a hard work ethic and talent are obviously two components that you look for in founders, but I'm guessing there's more to that. And hopefully, among the folks that will be listening to our chat here today, there's some talented, hardworking person who might be a good addition to the portfolio that you have. I'm curious to hear what are some additional characteristics of founders that you look for.
Well, I would say definitely willingness to learn. Constantly sort of upgrading your knowledge base, particularly, and not just even in Ethereum, but even in Bitcoin and many other blockchain networks now. There's so much change and so much new state of the art. It's very, very important to constantly kind of version over time, your knowledge base, and a willingness to do that is critical. I would also say just thinking about the ways in which people work together is really important.
What do you mean?
Well, so, there's some foundational stuff that's non-negotiable, right? Like defaulting to respect. When there's a hard problem, not just saying, oh, this is hard, we can't solve it, just breaking down, deconstructing the problem, understanding how to engage. We talked about this earlier before the podcast, international community, understanding how workflows go. And so, you can have expectations and sort of like, there's deliverables and there's things people have to do, but at the same time, you have to also understand that the way in which you communicate with people. So asynchronous communication, I think, is really important. Bogging people down with like calls all the time and all these, kind of like creating a set of requirements where they have to respond. And now the responsiveness is sort of like expensive, right? Because they have to take time out of the. So part of it is also, you also have to stay current. You also have to understand and be empathetic. You have to understand founders are working crazy hours. They're super busy.
It's really hard.
Yeah, so don't create additional overhead for them. That's kind of another key requirement. And so, one of the things I do, I don't do calls anymore, very rarely. I do, I leave a voice message, and then it's like people leave me voice messages. I listen to them at 2x speed, so you can get through it quickly. You try to like create condensed involuntary comprehension, as I like to call it, when you communicate with people, so you get to the point. Like I said, if you default to respect and people know you default to respect, you can be very direct in the way you communicate. You see what I'm saying? And then you can get straight to the point. And maybe there's times where expectations haven't been met. And you can talk about that in a respectful way, straight to the point, and kind of work through those things rather than, creating lots and lots of overhead. And then now founders have to kind of like deal with that. And, one of the things founders will tell you is, for example, when they're raising money, it's a big endeavor. It takes a lot of time. So if you have to spend 6 months or 3 months or whatever on your raise, and in the course of doing that, so much of it is tedious and onerous for no real reason, I think that's a bit taxing. And so that's another kind of core tenet that I try to adhere to and try to practice, which is that I believe in you. You're a smart person. You work hard. You're willing to learn. We talk to each other respectfully. We can get straight to the point. And I don't need you to necessarily explain so much to me and take that much time out of your day. Maybe once in a while we have a touch point. I'll leave a quick message. You can reply to me tomorrow, the day after, whatever. I don't need you now.
So you mentioned that you are not a lifestyle investor, and that you don't mind getting your hands dirty. So can you, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but could you give us another example? I mean, you mentioned that you were working, years on end with Mihailo on how he was developing his, ideas for scaling Ethereum. Could you give us some more color in this direction? Yeah,
sure. So, I mean, there was lots of instances where, for example, we had to be face-to-face and whiteboard, and it would have been very hard for him to come meet me somewhere. So I literally got on a plane from Tokyo, went to Belgrade, which is not exactly an easy connection.
I don't think it is.
And then
even with the direct flight, it wouldn't really be so much comfortable.
It's a little bit tough. But so you have to be accommodating. Just because you might have the capital doesn't necessarily mean that your founder should accommodate to you. And I think that's really important. Okay.
That's also a bit rare. I mean, more power to you.
And it's part of your commitment too. And so, there's been lots of instances where, like the inconvenience fell on me, let's say, wherein I would have to.
You invested in sweat equity in this case.
Take some action that maybe isn't comfortable. But, it was highly appreciated. And frankly, the reward is, you go through these things and maybe sometimes you solve problems and the thing ends up working. And like the dopamine hit from that is much, much greater because you've gone through a difficult process. And I think lots of kind of wellness VCs, as I like to say, it's like, I've got the capital, I've had the success, so you're just going to like follow my schedule and make things convenient for me. And,
I mean, fair, you can do that.
But I feel like the founders, the researchers, the grinders, those are the real heroes. And, if you're going to be serious in this business, I think you have to accommodate to them as much as you can. And so, that's something that I think helps build your reputation, and it's an important thing for VCs to consider a little bit more.
Yeah, I saw that you, at least I thought that your website has like this form for reach out, which would seem to me to be fairly welcoming. But I'm curious if you could give our founders some additional tips on how what's the best way to approach you with their idea.
Well, I would say similar to what I just said, it's like be very direct. So the worst thing is when I get a message, LinkedIn or whatever, and it's like, hey, how are you? And then it's like, dude, I've got 1,000 messages. I can't. Just be very direct. Be like, my name is this. Here's my project. Here's where we're at. Da-da-da-da-da. And then like include a Calendly link or some other, convenient way to get in touch. So be very, very direct. I think a lot of times founders, it's hard for them to understand that, particularly when you get to some kind of scale. I mean, it's crazy, and I'm trying to figure out how to manage it, but it's hard. You just end up with, some days I get like 1,000 messages or more. And so you have to filter that, and there's only so much you can do as a person. I try to use tools, and I try to manage that as best as I can, but please be very direct. Again, default to respect, but just be very direct, and then, that saves a lot of time. And I would say in terms of cold calling, that's really the best way to do it.
Awesome. So you've spent a lot of time at, I'm going to say one of the foundational institutions of Web3 in terms of consensus. I mean, hopefully I'm not going too far, but that's the impression that I got for over the years. And also you've spent a lot of time with Polygon, which is doing amazing things and a lot of work done on scaling Ethereum. Recently, you've started a new position at Telos. So for those of us who are not as up to speed with Telos, could you help us understand better what you guys do? I mean, I saw a video that you did where you said something along the lines of Telos is a bit boring in terms of it just keeps grinding and there's not a lot of hype around it. At least that's how I understood what you meant. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And Raul, our head of marketing, is here, and he's heard this so many times he's going to kill me again. But it's the analogy. The analogy I use is like before Netflix, we used to have VHS, right? Telos is one of those B Hollywood movies that went straight to VHS. Okay, and then over the years later, 10, 20 years later, has like a cult following.
Okay,
and then it becomes cool. So Telos launched in 2018. It was a fork of EOS. At the time, EOS was like this super big money project. It raised $4 billion plus. And well, I guess the community felt like the funds were not invested into the project as promised. And so they decided to fork. And so at the base layer, it's got delegated proof of stake, which has some interesting characteristics we can get into later. And in 2018, in the midst of ICO mania, they did what's called a share drop or a fair drop. They airdropped the entire supply. So there was never an ICO, there was never a token sale, there was never a liquidity event that generated a lot of money or anything like that. And so from there, it just started to kind of grind away. And the community had to figure out a way to like survive. I call it like the cockroach approach. You just do whatever it takes with no money to survive. And somehow it did. In 2021, on top of this delegated proof of stake layer 0, they built an EVM. And the EVM actually was fuzz tested by an auditor called Sentinel, who discovered a major exploit in Ethereum that almost brought down Ethereum.
Okay.
That's how I heard about Telos. The coordination amongst the various clients was done very quickly, and luckily the exploit wasn't attacked or realized. And then I invested, and then I kind of followed the project. Late last year in 2023, one of the founders like rage quit, dumped all his tokens, and I saw some activity, and I said, "Wow, something's going on." And I realized it was a tremendous opportunity because there was like a cultural shift happening. And you know, over the years, I've been thinking about ZK very intensely, and so I thought maybe this is an opportunity to start implementing some of my thoughts on ZK.
So before we go into that, if we could take one small step backwards for the normies among the audience, including myself, could you explain in like simple terms what does Telos does? What's the mission?
Yeah, so it's a blockchain that it's actually, I would say, reorganizing itself into sort of like a venture production studio with a blockchain layer. And it innovates products in support of the network and the Telos community. And so at the base layer, we have the layer 0 delegated proof of stake. We have the EVM. Now we're launching a ZK EVM on Ethereum. And the Telos token cuts through and is useful in all of these networks. So it's one of the rare tokens that can go into multiple different networks and multiple different systems across this one ecosystem. And we develop products as well in support of all of that. So SnarkTor is our most recent product, and it's a recursive proof aggregator. So it's a decentralized recursive proof protocol. And together, somehow, we're trying to build this vibrant ecosystem that gives our users a variety of interesting choice for how they want to use the various products and services that are available in the Telos community. Likewise, the whole thing is very organic. It's like totally community owned. The Telos Foundation is a nonprofit organization. There's no like big central company or anything like that which has poured in a bunch of money or has controlling financial interests or anything like that. The token is totally distributed. There's no big unlocks. There's no big VC holdings or anything like that. And so what we're trying to do is basically create, at this stage, in this moment, a type of experiment, a lab, if you will. Specifically, going back to the ZK side of things, zero knowledge. Zero knowledge right now is, I think, the most important development track that's happening in all of crypto. And this
I saw that there was a trademark attempt.
That's right.
But I just wanted to say that I might ask you a bit more normie questions around ZK.
No problem.
So for a person that is sort of only following Web3 from a side, and for a non-technical person, you know, ZK sounds, you know, it's sort of catchy on the one hand, and on the other hand, you know, once you sort of scratch the surface, it sounds hard. I mean, we had a conversation with another guest who is building in the ZK space, and he said, "Well, math is hard." So yeah, so can you walk us through what ZK?
Sure. Well, ZK zero knowledge is very hard. It's very very hard, and so
sounds cool. Zero, yeah.
Well, it refers to basically you can sort of prove that you know something without revealing what it is that you know. And the reason that's very important is because I think the ultimate end game and the real utility of the blockchain will be self-sovereign identity. And so self-sovereign identity refers to establishing your identity on-chain. So there's a public address, a public key.
Without doxing yourself fully.
Well, that's why you need ZK.
Yeah.
So let me take a step back. Alberto Garofalo, head of ZK at Telos, a very good friend of mine, he uses a simple example which I think illustrates the point. So you come to Belgrade for the weekend and you rent a car, okay, for like 3 days, and it costs you 100 euros. You would never use a blockchain system to rent that car, if it meant your license would be on-chain forever for everyone to see. Okay. With ZK, you can actually establish your identity on-chain. So now you have a canonical identity. Okay, this is on your public address that everyone can see. And you have persona constructs that describe you in different contexts. For example, maybe you're a gamer, so you have your gamer persona, which has your username, which games you like to play, how many points you have. Or maybe you have your, let's say, government ID KYC persona, which relates to things that a bank might need to know, or a car rental agency, or a real business, such as that you're 18, that you're a citizen of this country, or that you have a valid driver's license, etc. With ZK, you can realize self-sovereign identity, going back to that car rental use case. If instead you went to the car rental agency and rather than putting your license on chain, you generated a proof that you are 18 and have a valid driver's license. And what went on chain is not your driver's license, but rather just a proof that some claims you have made about your identity are valid, which relate to the requirements that the car rental agency would need to know about you before they can rent the car. Okay? So you can establish your identity on chain, you can selectively disclose information, you can granularly authenticate without ever revealing. So in other words, data protection, you can protect your data. This is critically important for a number of reasons. I grew up in America, so the American context is, Equifax. 100+ million American, all these things get hacked all the time.
Yep.
Okay, so the vast majority of use cases in the world today, which the blockchain, in my opinion, cannot service, require this level of data protection. And so ZK allows you to have custody over your identity, i.e. you have the private key, which corresponds to the public key on the chain, wherein all your identity attributes and attestations against those attributes by others reside. This is really important because attestations against attributes forms the notion of reputation. And so with your private key, you can log into places and selectively disclose and avail of products and services without ever having to reveal sensitive information. Therefore, you don't jeopardize by potentially having, for example, in the Philippines, the Commission on Elections was hacked. 62 million Filipino voter records are now available on the dark web. You can buy someone's identity. Many countries.
A bunch of that stuff has happened in Serbia and Europe. Some more known, some less known, but it's a liability.
Correct.
Yeah.
So let's invert the model. Rather than putting this tremendous liability on these businesses and services, government or private sector, to not get hacked, why don't you have full control of your identity, and instead you share proofs that attributes about your identity are valid, and in this way you can kind of like interact with the internet in a completely different way. Okay, that's more secure. And so this also applies to machines, right? So when you think about intelligent agents, I kind of talk about this in the cliche AI blockchain context. I think intelligent agents will be transacting on chain, both in, so running our global political, social, and economic operating system for the planet. Let's say in the financial use case example, you can imagine intelligent agents arbitraging and doing very well in the market because they're intelligent. Those agents will necessarily demand fully provable systems, which means that when they interact with other agents, they will need to know that claims are not being misrepresented. They will need to know that every single computational step in storage operation is fully provable, meaning that, let's say in the case of Occupy Wall Street, you had Bear Stearns and others making claims about their capacity to pay. Other institutions assumed risk based on those claims, believing them to be true. When it came time to pay, the truth was revealed they didn't have the capacity to pay. And neither did many others. And that caused a chain reaction, which almost brought down the global financial system.
So one good thing we could say was perhaps the final push or motivation for the Bitcoin white paper.
Correct.
Yeah.
Bitcoin emerged from that.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. With ZK, it is impossible, or let's say it's very, very, very hard to misrepresent some claim.
Yeah.
Because any claim that you make will be provable, or will necessarily, these intelligent systems will necessarily demand that they be provable. So the reason I got into Telos and the reason we're so big on ZK is because I believe building the infrastructure, this fully provable ZK-based infrastructure, will be the destination. I say nothing much is happening, and then suddenly all at once, all of this stuff will go onto these systems.
So as we mentioned already, ZK is a fraudy space, or at least it seems so. I mean, we had one attempt to, trademark the entire, concept. What makes your approach special? You might have already, given some answers to that, but
let me just say the trademark that has nothing to do with the technology or the protocol. It's just a bunch of humans deciding to. Yeah. And by the way, the community responded.
Appropriately, it seems.
Correct. So there's things humans can try to do, but the system itself, I think, is very, very, very hard to have fraudulent, let's say, interactions on a fully provable system, because you can demand that any claims your counterparty makes must be proven. So you can have very strong assurances that what they claim is actually what you can expect. Okay? In the case of Telos, our approach, maybe it's a little bit technical, but we're taking a hardware, software, co-design approach.
Yeah, I saw something along those lines. Seems hard, but I'd be
so it's
happy
like
to learn.
It's like this. Ethereum right now runs on proof of stake. Everything is sort of rehypothecated, meaning that you just have basically layers and layers of, well, staking, restaking, and then borrowing against that. And so, and then you have all these networks that basically provide subsidies that attract users, but actually it's parasitic behavior. It's like a bunch of locusts coming through, like airdrop farming. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just, it's not real user growth. And then once the subsidies are gone, then they move on to the next thing and so on. Okay.
Locusts, nice.
In the meantime, Ethereum itself is actually a poor ZK execution environment for a lot of technical reasons. At the same time, you have monsters that are coming, things like Alio, things like Monad, other competing networks, which from the start have taken ZK as their core principle and built basically blockchain systems around that. Ethereum came much earlier before the maturity of ZK, and so it's not really well designed for this kind of stuff. And what do I mean by that? I mean, generating proofs and posting proofs online is very, very expensive. It's very cumbersome. It's slow. And so I believe that ASICs will return to Ethereum. Okay, I believe hardware will play a major role in making ZK usable and functional, insofar as the cost and speed with which you can use these systems will be significantly lower in terms of cost and significantly faster in terms of basically usability. And so thinking about how to build a robust ZK, for example, in our case, ZK VM L2, necessarily requires from the start taking into consideration hardware and software. And so there are already ASIC manufacturers. I was just in Shenzhen, China. There's a group called Axial. They just taped an ASIC. It's a ZK proving ASIC. They're actually going in mass production next month. I don't think you can put the entire ZK, like in other words, the entire system on chip. I think there's some functionalities you can accelerate right now, but the entire system on chip is still some ways away. So there's going to be an FPGA interim step. But we're going to get to ASICs. We're going to get to ZK proving ASICs. Some might say snark proving ASICs. I mean, there's different technical debates about that. But in any case, proving will be done by specialized hardware. That will tremendously, when done in conjunction with software that factors in this hardware element, produce results that are very, very fast, very low cost, such that the user uses the system without really even noticing that all of this complex computation is happening in the background, whereas today they might sort of have to wait a long time, pay a lot of money, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's kind of like, let's say, our base case thesis, hardware, software, co-design. So then the next part is, what other products, services, tools can you build to further accelerate? So there's the car rental example where you sort of generate a proof. Well, one proof on-chain is going to be expensive and take time. However, if you aggregate many proofs off-chain, and then you post one chain on proof, a recursive proof, which has an underlying set of proofs, many underlying set of proofs, then you can share the cost. And so that's one way to kind of like, or distribute the cost. That's kind of one way for any individual user to be able to use the system, post a proof on-chain, and not incur a tremendous cost. I'm talking about, like, you know, potentially hundreds of dollars going down to fractions of a penny. Likewise, the actual proving then gets done by this specialized hardware. So it happens very, very fast because that's all the hardware does. And so suddenly you're able to aggregate proofs, you're able to offload the proving to specialized hardware, and now you have performance characteristics that start to look like, you know, something that users expect. And so when you pair that with lots of innovation that's happening on the mobile side of things, we believe that user-generated proofs is going to be a big part of this, i.e., on your mobile device, you generate a proof very quickly, something similar to, you know, using Apple Face ID to unlock your phone. And that proof maybe validates some claims that you've made about your identity, such as proving that you have a valid license, in the case of the car rental example. So now you can go into the car rental agency, you can generate a proof on your device, the proving is done in this kind of way that I just described, And now everything happens in a fraction of a second at a very low cost. And so you're able to rent the car without disclosing your driver's license and posting that on chain.
And having any liability. So the vision is literally awesome. The problem is very, very hard.
Yes.
What's the horizon for having this in production? I know I'm asking an impossible question, but I'm just curious.
It's a great question. So that's why I think Telos is an important, it's this like small network that doesn't have big stakeholders, doesn't have any big overhead, and can fail fast and fail very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lab to experiment. We can monitor the current state of everything, and in one moment, kind of like put the pieces of the puzzle together. I liken it to, I've said this before, I mean, it's a little controversial, but I think everybody so far has raced to build the Alta Vista or Yahoo of ZK. Right before the Elasticsearch and Google moment arrived. And of course, Google won everything. So I think ZK is very similar insofar as the innovation is incredible. There's so many talented, hardworking people that are, the innovation, it's like every day now there's something new.
Yeah.
And I think in one moment, at some point in the near future, these various components will be mature enough and performant enough that you can kind of put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And now you've got this like system that actually users can use. And in particular, I think AI can use. And so Telos is kind of like doing a lot of research, constantly evaluating everything. We have a great partner in Ponos Technology, one of the best ZK research teams in the world. I think we've got 11 PhDs now on the team. And we have this like flexible approach. We haven't raised $100 million from these wellness VCs that are like forcing us to go to a certain direction. Yeah. We don't have go-to-market pressures. Our token is already out. We've been in the market for many years. We have a small but very like supportive community. And so along the way, we're developing. And so Snarktor, our recursive proof aggregator, is kind of one key component. We're going to actually be demoing that next month at SCC awesome. in Brussels with a hardware acceleration component to it. And by the end of the year or early next year, we're going to be launching our ZK EVM RL2. And so by then, I think we're going to be in a position where we'll have constantly monitored and evaluated the latest state of the art. There's so many great teams. Obviously Polygon and some of the work they're doing with Plonky 3, Risk Zero, some of these wonderful teams. The ZK Summit just happened in Athens. It was an incredible conference. It demonstrated like the pace of innovation in this space. And we think we can put the puzzle together and have a highly performant ZK EVM that's going to be able to compete with the best of them. And we think we can do it at a fraction of the cost. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if we get it wrong, which probably we're going to get a lot of things wrong, we can fail. It's fine. We can fail real fast. We can fail real cheap, learn from that, and keep going.
That's very entrepreneurial. So this has been a wild and awesome roller coaster, of a career of an angel investor and an executive. And thank you for all the advice and that you shared. And I would especially encourage all of the entrepreneurs and founders to feel free to pitch at you, by defaulting to respect.